Welcome back to Coffee Talk with Mel. We're here again from the Coffee Grinder in Warwick with a very special guest, Miss Melissa Delana.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us
I'm
today.
so excited to be here. This is a great coffee shop. If you've not been, you guys should check it out for
You're
sure.
so kind. Now, Melissa is a real estate attorney, and she also does estates and wills and a few other things. And she has been a practicing real estate attorney for 20 years now.
2 decades.
Oh my goodness. Well, I am sure you have a stack of stories. You could probably write a book.
Yes.
But today we're going to kind of stick on the real estate side. And I really, really, really want to just get into the nitty gritty of it because as we know, buyers and sellers and agents and more agents can become very problematic. And as I've talked in my real estate horror stories before, how important title is in regards to a property.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into real estate
Sure.
and your company?
So Delana Law Office is in East Greenwich. We do travel for closings. So we are currently servicing Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. So we've got the tri-state because there's lots of people moving around. The practice was actually developed by my father, Carmen Delana, and he's been practicing 50 years.
Stop it. He's
Yes.
been 50 years
50
now?
years.
Oh, when I have a closing with him next, I'm going to bring it up.
You should. Yeah. So I actually received my bar licensing on his 30th anniversary. And
That's
the
so
same
sweet.
person who told him he passed told me I passed. She was still at the Supreme Court level.
Love that story.
So Rhode Island.
So
right?
Rhode Island.
So very fun. We have a great dynamic practice together. We love working together, bouncing ideas off each other, just trying to get through transactions because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about representing buyers, representing sellers, making sure that we're having a seamless transaction despite the hiccups, bumps, and lumps that we go through. And yes, we service a lot of clients and we support a lot of realtors in Rhode Island, a lot of lenders in Rhode Island, Mass, and Connecticut. And that is our goal, is just to try to go above and beyond and have a smooth closing.
And I have to say, I have been working with both you and your father since I got my license in 2005.
That's crazy.
Oh my goodness. And it's funny. So just kind of a little background. I actually met Melissa and her father prior to getting my real estate license. I worked with your sister, Ashley, at a restaurant. And I remember you and your whole family coming in. And
again, so Rhode Island. There's like no separation degree, you know?
And my favorite is that Rachel and I just did a transaction together.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
And
Rachel is my niece.
Yes. And I remember as soon as I called to schedule a showing, I said, Rachel, this might be weird, but I remember when you were 12.
She's like, yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. She was so cool though. It was really, 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 and it was a great transaction. She's a great agent. It was really nice.
Nice.
Because obviously I love your family through and through.
Oh, thank you. And we love working with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I don't know if your dad would say the same thing.
No, that's not true.
I just bring problems.
You know what? Honestly, the problems find themselves in the transaction, whether it's title related, whether it's personality, whether it's somebody that's not paying attention or doing their job.
Most people.
So I totally agree with you, but I really don't think that it's you. I mean, there are certain degrees of you attract the problems because you're a problem is a theory in life, but that is not how real estate works. Like real estate is bumpy. You've got to remember, right? Like think about it. One of the most fundamental things in life, like back to the basic human needs, is home. Yeah. You need to have your home situated. And when your home has any kind of upheaval, I think you really start to see a lot of dynamics coming out. I mean, frankly, yes.
Ugh, and people can't handle their emotions.
They can't. They can't. And they don't have any, you talk about like compartmentalizing and trying to put things into buckets. But when your house is not in order, I think it's really difficult, especially for the average person. We live this.
We know it. So we expect issues to
totally.
arise.
And
we're ready for it. And I try to prepare clients.
Of course, you have to. And I'm sure even in your own personal transactions, as in my personal transactions, we're sort of desensitized to it a little bit. But when we see buyers and sellers going through it, like I always try to brace them for impact because I know this is going to feel awkward and icky and uncomfortable, but this is normal because this is life.
100%. And I even remember when I was closing on my house and it was an estate and I wanted to close before Christmas. It was really important to me. It was kind of as though I was buying myself a Christmas present. It was very important, this transaction. And Melissa just went above and beyond. And normally any other attorney would have been like, nope, we need the 20-day waiting period. But you were able to work it out with the other attorney, hold the seller's proceeds, and we were still able to close.
Yeah.
So you found a solution for the buyer and for the seller. And that really, really, really just, I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that.
Well, thanks.
But speaking on buyers,
yes.
What do you think is one of the top things to tell buyers when they're going through a transaction and when they're deciding on a closing attorney?
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I just had this conversation last week where a real estate agent referred my office. The loan originator referred a different office. So the client called and they were trying to get a handle on fees, right? Well, you get what you pay for. So there's plenty of discount shops out there for all aspects of life. I'm not the cheapest. We're not the most expensive. We're very average, middle of the road as far as cost. So what I said to the client, what I've said to clients before is at the end of the day, it should be about your relationship. Mm-hmm. You want to be able to have an ongoing conversation with your counsel so that you can address any questions that arise. You have somebody there to support you, and they have a good working relationship with your lender and with your realtor so that the team kind of comes together to support that smooth transaction approach. And I think that that's the most important thing. At the end of the day, anybody's going to conduct the closing. Anybody's going to tell you, yeah, the title's right. Whether or not it is, the devil's in the details. So you really need somebody. And with our office being in practice for 50 years, our reputation is kind of tried and true. It's out there. We've been doing this for a long time. You're always going to be able to call on us if, God forbid, something does come up later. Mm-hmm. We hope that it doesn't. And, certainly that's one of the benefits of title insurance. But you need to have that open dialogue and line of communication with your attorney.
So I heard you mention title insurance.
Yes.
I am very, very well versed in title insurance, but I think the general public doesn't really understand it. All they see is this extra fee that they're paying, and a buyer's like, I don't want to pay an extra fee. And especially when you have all these investors that are buying multiple properties at a time, they're saying $1,000 here, $2,000 there. Can you get in depth a little bit about what exactly title insurance is and why we have to have it or why we don't have to have it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it is probably one of the single most asked questions, not only from realtors, but also from lenders. They're like, I don't really know what this is or how to explain it. Like,
why is it a fee?
Can you just deal with this? And again, that's where the attorney should be willing to have an open conversation with clients, not just always having to talk to support staff or paralegals or admins, right? So title insurance has two basic components. There's a lender's policy, which is always required if there's going to be a loan in place on the purchase. And then there's an optional owner's policy. So again, you see the word optional and you're like, I opt not. I don't want to spend this extra money. But I think that it's really important once consumers understand what the protections are, is that it ultimately is protecting you in the event, God forbid, that there's a title issue that was not discoverable, that you are able to go back and have a title insurance company with lots and lots of money work towards resolving that claim. And I think the best way to understand it is by way of example. So I had one years and years ago where there was a tax sale. And the town made a mistake in the way that they typed up the tax sale notices. Okay. And it was a very innocent typographical mistake, but it was at the beginning of the name. So if the name is Smith, but the letters M and I are mixed up, you're not going to discover that in a search because you have to put a minimum number of characters in. Oh, really? And you're not going to search Smith, like that. Of course you're not. That's not the name. Yeah. So that is a simple example being Smith. Obviously, it wasn't Smith. It was a much more complex name. But what happened was the client walked into our office and almost tears and said, I am going to lose this house because it went to tax sale. And I said, sir, I assure you that's not what's going to happen. I know this is really stressful and I'm going to do everything I can to try to answer your question right now. So we pulled the file. We were able to quickly, it took a few days, but I was able to demonstrate to him, you have a title policy. And this is exactly why title policies were invented. Mm-hmm. So we were able to go back and identify that when the town made this typographical mistake, it was not discoverable. This is where title insurance is born. And I contacted the other attorney and the other attorney said, well, I made a mistake. I'm going to have to pay for it. I said, no. your client should submit a title insurance claim because this happened during their ownership. When my client bought it, we were unsuspecting, and that's exactly what we did. And it didn't take a long time. I mean, we weren't talking millions of dollars, but we were talking probably $2,000. Yeah. And that can be a budget buster for a lot of regular homeowners.
Of course.
You didn't plan for this. You didn't do anything. This isn't your liability. So the title insurance company just simply wrote the check. We did get the town to alleviate some of the interest because it was their mistake too.
Great.
So they were willing to abate some of the interest because they identified.
Amazing. Because most towns will not.
Right. This town was willing to work with us because they recognized the error. And we were able to get the check cut fairly quickly. You know, obviously everybody moved forward and my clients didn't lose their house, most importantly, and they didn't have to pay for something they didn't plan on. All because they had purchased this title policy and their predecessor had a title policy. Because that's the one thing about title insurance people don't realize is it will protect you even after you've sold. If something comes up.
You know, I just learned something new, Melissa.
Hey, this is what we're here for.
So if you have title insurance on a home that you own, let's say for 3 years.
Yes.
And then you sell it to somebody else and then that person ends up having a problem, but it was during the time of your ownership, your old title policy that you had on that house will still be in effect.
Yes. And it would protect you for any culpability that particular party would have. So, you know, this is the reason that when I explain title insurance to clients, and I'm like, yes, I understand it's an extra $800 or $1,000 or, you know, it's all commensurate with how much equity the homeowner has, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're purchasing a home for $500,000 and your loan is only $100,000, well, now the lender's policy is going to be very minimal because their risk of exposure is only that $100,000 loan. Homeowner is now insuring $400,000, which is the equity or delta difference. For their owner's policy. So now they're looking at it going, well, why is the lender's policy only $300 and mine is $3,000? And I don't know if those are real numbers.
Of course.
This is just an example.
Exactly.
But that is where, when you have higher risk of exposure, you need that policy. And it's a one-time fee. It lasts for as long as you own the property and then some. So that's why I'm always saying, I understand that you don't want to buy it. And that's fair. But if it's really just about dollars and cents, let's figure this out because it's a very, very worthwhile policy to have.
So every buyer, when they have the option for the lender policy and the owner policy, they should 1,000% get both.
I would never buy a property without it. So that's the answer that I give everybody. Mm-hmm.
And every property I've bought, I've done the same thing.
Yeah.
I've always gotten both policies. And, you know, I had Matt Tonning on a previous episode.
Yes.
And we actually touched base on the title insurance because I don't know if you recall, but he had a property that he had to actually use the title insurance.
I don't remember.
And he complained, him and his brother, every
that they didn't want to buy it.
Why are we paying this? Why are we paying this? And they would always pay in cash, right? So it's optional. And I'm like, just do it. And your dad, just do it. It's trust me.
Yeah.
And then they had an issue where somebody I think had bought the lot through a tax sale or through a previous owner. And so he came to him because he was doing something on the property. He goes, I own this land. And Matt was like, what do I do? And then he called your office and, you know, the title insurance company picked it up, took a few months to go through. But, you know, he didn't have to put $1 out of his pocket. Right. And I think that's the big thing.
Well, and you touched on a good point because one of the things that we always talk about is the title insurance company, they're in the place of defending. They don't want to pay the claim.
No.
So they're going to appoint an attorney to defend the claim. And if they're not successful, that's when they pay the claim. And that's when the equity interest gets paid. Yeah. So in the example I gave, that if this person owns $400,000 free and clear, that's what the title insurance company is going to write the check for if the property was lost or forfeited due to, you know, that kind of thing. The typographical.
So then they would get the $400,000 from
the title company
policy, and then the extra $100 from the lender's policy.
Exactly.
Or the loan would be covered through the lender's policy.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and hopefully you're never going to be in a position where losing the property is, I mean, that would be a very significant title issue.
Of course.
But
I can't say it hasn't happened before.
Absolutely.
Crazy stuff happens.
Yep.
Wow. So that's one thing for buyers is definitely make sure that they get title insurance. Mm-hmm. Is there any advice you have for first-time home buyers entering into a contract? Because in the state of Rhode Island, real estate agents do contracts, right? And it's a standard contract. And I just feel as though at times buyers aren't fully educated, even if they do fully read the agreement. And even there's a handful of agents that might not be educated
There's
either.
no client that reads the entire purchase and sales agreement, in my experience. They may look it over, they may ask questions, but I don't feel like they fully appreciate and understand all the rights and responsibilities that are outlined in that agreement. I do think that a good buyer's agent, and I know you do it too, will take the client through and give them sort of a snippet understanding of what this all means. I mean, I would love to say, yes, get an attorney to review it so that you don't have any questions that are unanswered. But buyers don't take the time to do it. Attorneys may not be accessible in that, short, fragmented time that you have. So, I think that probably the most important thing in a purchase and sales agreement is to make sure that you're working with a well-respected realtor who's drafting it for you, because to some degree you have to put your trust in them, that they are drafting this with all of your best interests in mind. All of the terms that you've discussed and agreed to with the seller are being memorialized, because if it's not in writing, it doesn't count.
Repeat that again, please.
If it's not in writing, it doesn't count. Yeah, we need to memorialize it with either an addendum or in the contract itself.
Signed by both parties.
Absolutely, yes. Fully executed. Unilateral contracts don't count. Unilateral changes don't count. We need to make sure that it is signed and agreed to by all parties.
And what would you say for buyers are their biggest mistakes going through the transactions? I'm sure you've seen deposits being lost and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
From an attorney perspective.
From an attorney perspective, I think one of the biggest mistakes that a buyer can make right now is not having a buyer's agent or representative, because in my experience, those buyers are not as well versed in what to expect. And, I'd like to think I'm a great lawyer, but even at that, I'm not a real estate agent. I'm not there with you at the home inspection. I'm not able to counsel you about a lolly column. These are things that your realtors are well versed in, all of these issues and items. And I really think you're paying for their expertise. So, this has been a conversation that we've been having for over a year now with the advent of the, kind of decoupling of compensation and buyers agents being hired by buyers directly. And I really think that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see being made. One that I unfortunately am seeing more and more. I'm seeing more and more buyers come through unrepresented. Yeah.
Really. And I have a feeling that is going to probably in 12 to 24 months really create a lot of lawsuits or ethics complaints in the different boards, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I just heard of a real estate person that I know, and, the people didn't want representation, and it's 3 transactions that went south, deposits lost. She had to put in money.
I think I may know the transaction. I'm positive I do.
And I said to her,
it's never worth it.
It's never worth it. So my big thing is I have done transactions where the buyer has not had representation, and you end up doing more work. It's more frustrating, and you open yourself up to this huge liability. And now, unnecessarily, with these new mandates that have happened in the real estate industry, I find that, I even had a text message on a new listing yesterday from somebody, can I see it today? Well, no. But when do you want to get in? These are the different days and times. And are you working with a real estate agent? If you're not, do you have a pre-approval or proof of funds?
Right.
And so the person says, I might have a real estate agent. I said, okay, well, the question is either you need to bring them in at the beginning,
right,
or you don't have a real estate agent. But in my business, I'm implementing, I want everyone to be representation.
Absolutely.
Because it opens not only myself as a listing agent, but the sellers open.
100%. And that transaction that you just mentioned, that is exactly what happened.
And that's what I'm saying to sellers today. I'm like, look, 99% of buyers are going to come in with an agent.
Most of them do.
And it is going to help you and protect you if anything 100%. Comes up after the fact.
Well, not to mention you also have someone guiding them throughout the transaction. So it's going to be more organized. It's going to be better. And probabilities tell me that your sellers are probably buying something else. So they need to make sure those dominoes fall into place exactly right. Because if this first one in the train doesn't go off the way it's supposed to, their subsequent transaction is going to be sidelined or derailed. And that's not going to be a good fit or a good feeling for them. They could be displaced. And that is why I think having agents involved for each side, buyers and
100%.
sellers respectively, is the best practice that we can have. And I think that is the single biggest mistake that I'm seeing buyers make potentially.
Agents and buyers and sellers both need representation
Absolutely.
on both sides for real estate agents and for attorneys.
Yeah, we've seen a huge transition to attorneys to have legal representation for sellers as well.
I'm just noticing more and more non-recorded discharges.
Oh yeah.
Hunting down those discharges
Yep.
and other things that they were like, well, I didn't know I had this, or I didn't know I had this against it. I didn't know I had this. Well, you do. We're not making it up.
Right. And that's an example of an issue that the seller has some sort of defect in their title or some sort of issue, which it is the seller's responsibility to
1000%.
convey clear title to the buyer. But if the seller doesn't have representation and didn't realize that that line of credit they took out was actually recorded against the title, because almost everybody thinks it's just a personal loan. Newsflash.
What, a line of credit?
Yeah, it's not personal.
it.
I'm telling you. Mel, I
Stop
hear it all
it.
the time. Oh no, that was a personal loan. That's not against the house. Yes, it is. I have one right now. Yep. I asked the client, how many mortgages do you have? Just one. Okay.
Home
Well,
equity line of credit.
but
it actually has the word
home.
home in it.
You're right. Well, I got the title back after I talked to the client, and sure and more, there's a line of credit with Citizens. So I'm like, okay, back to the drawing board. We have to get all the information because we need to secure the payoff. And if there's not a payoff because they're not using it, then we need to secure the discharge. Or if they just invariably just paid it off. Now we have no evidence that it was paid off. We don't have that discharge that you're talking about, but it is the seller's responsibility to clear title. And if they can't, the closing could be delayed, or there could be a financial cost associated with having to hold an escrow or something of that nature, which again, when you're looking at what's my turnaround money going to be for my subsequent investment into a new property, we don't have time for these hiccups. So I think it is so important for sellers to get counsel involved and get this involved as early as possible.
And I think it's very important for buyers and sellers alike to know of any domino effects in the transaction.
You mean we shouldn't keep it a secret?
I've
been there.
If I see one more thing come in and not say subject to the successful closing of X, Y, and Z, I mean, we all in the transaction know if it doesn't close, you're not buying the house.
I know.
So without that language, you're not protected.
I mean, I think it's like some agents and or clients are kind of in this bait and switch situation where they just don't want to
lose the house.
Right. They don't want to be as transparent as possible because they're fearful
that
there'll be a different offer that's better.
Getting accepted.
Right. And I get that. I do understand that strategy. But it's really wholly unfair to the seller not to know about such a major contingency, honestly.
And then imagine if that's holding up another sale, because sometimes there's 3-4 domino effects.
100%.
I mean, we haven't seen it as much in the past, like 4 to 5 years, but you're seeing it more and more. I feel as though, especially in this year, and I think next year we are just gonna see it
100%
across the board.
Yeah. And I have a lot of people moving across state lines, and that has implications. Yeah. So I just had one where they were relocating. I'm going to try to remember if I've got this straight. Somebody was relocating from Rhode Island to Maine. There was somebody relocating from Vermont to Rhode Island, and somebody moving out of Rhode Island and going into Connecticut. So it was like all these states, which have different jurisdictional rules.
And different tax laws.
And different implications with time is of the essence, which we haven't really talked about. But in Rhode Island, our closing dates are very
Loosey goosey.
Yeah, I would say target dates. Yeah. They're not firm. They're not set in stone. So if either buyer or seller needs additional time, generally speaking, we have a reasonable amount of time. I don't know, a couple of weeks.
I was going to say 14 days, 30 days.
Factually specific, but I would say on average a couple of weeks would get it done. That's not the case in every state. So Mel, if you've got somebody buying in another state, which is subject to time is of the essence, but their sale in Rhode Island is not time is of the essence, and that sale gets derailed and they didn't have a contingency in that other state, they could absolutely lose their deposit, be displaced. There's lots of far-reaching implications, which is why I think it's so important that the agents and the attorneys and the clients are having
a good relationship.
Yes, and making sure that we are actively protecting this
our
client.
Clients, 100%. So obviously, as we know, it's very important for buyers to have representation. But now I'm going to flip the script a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think is the number one most important thing for why a seller should have seller representation?
Well, I mean, I think it's just become wildly popular really since COVID. Buyers and sellers just kind of separated because we couldn't have more than a few people in the room at the same time.
With multiple masks.
I know.
And all. Remember the plexiglass?
Spit shields. Yeah, yes. I will say, I actually, and if you remember.
I don't remember. You had the thing.
But yeah, I had a shield. I had an actual shield.
With the thing around your head.
But I actually was conducting closings where clients were sitting in my waiting room and I was at the receptionist window.
Oh, I think I do
and I was
that.
conducting closings far away when it first hit because we didn't know what we didn't know. But thank God that's over. And it's just how buyers and sellers separated. Although this week I actually did have a closing with the buyers and sellers all at the same time. And it was so sweet because it was an older couple and it was a young couple. And it was just like, this is exactly what the closings used to feel like. And I loved having the party. They got to talk about what time trash comes on what day and exchange 100%, the keys in a ceremonious way. But, you know, honestly, since we've had this evolution, which by the way, most of the pilgrims had done well before us, pilgrims, because we're the last
Rhode
to
Island
implement
is
change.
Like the lowest of the low on change.
Yes.
Being good at anything in real estate.
Well, so I really don't think it's going to go back to like parties normally being together. I think that sellers have just gotten really comfortable with this. Most of my professionals tell me that they prefer it. Most of my clients tell me that they prefer it. You know, if a buyer, especially a first timer,
if they're being difficult or if they might not even know they're being difficult.
Even just the privacy perspective. If you're a first time buyer, some of this are really foreign concepts and you've got two agents and a seller looking at you while you're doing the signing, it's a little unnerving.
Oh, that's kind of like a pressure cooker situation.
Yeah, they're like, yeah, I'm signing, but I don't understand it. They don't feel like they can ask questions and it's just not the same free exchange of information. So I do like it being segregated for that reason. And I also find that sellers are now able to avoid taking time out of work. You know, they're able to sign in advance. So there's a lot of conveniences that we've, you know, kind of taken from that.
And especially if they're doing a simultaneous close, right?
100%.
With those domino effects, because then they can go and they can sign prior to the closing, focus on moving out that morning or the day before. I always prefer a day before.
Yes, absolutely.
And while we're on this seller topic.
Yes.
What are your feelings about rent backs or use and occupancy?
Oh.
And I just want to touch on this because I feel as though people are so, oh yeah, of course you can stay in the house.
Yeah. So
explain why this is not the best of ideas.
I'm glad that you brought this up, Mel. And I actually drafted an addendum for use and occupancies because I think—
I know I asked Tabitha for it the other day.
Oh, did you? I think for me, one of the biggest struggles that I see, right, we just talked, memorializing what's in the contract is important. And I'll see something that says, seller to hold over the property for 5 days for free. Well, okay, that's great. But what happens in that 5-day period if the hot water tank lets go? Who's going to maintain?
Yeah. What if a tree falls on the house?
Absolutely. Who's maintaining their insurances, utilities? What about security deposit? What if the seller leaves and they don't take all their stuff with them? We've forfeited the opportunity for a walkthrough because the closing already took place. So there's so many aspects really that need to be developed to go into a thorough use and occupancy agreement for allowing this rent rent back situation. So I did draft an addendum. It's just 2 pages that our realtors can use to kind of identify what the parties have agreed to. It stipulates who's going to be responsible for drafting, buyer's or seller's attorney, who's responsible for incurring costs for that drafting if there are applicable charges, buyers or sellers. And it just tries to enumerate some of those gaps that you'd otherwise have if it just said in the contract, seller to hold over for 5 days for free. So I will always draft a thorough agreement. I will always make recommendations for as many formalities as possible. Yeah, you probably don't need them. But what if the seller holds over and now the buyer's displaced? Why not put a per day penalty in there to compensate the buyer for the time that the seller hasn't left? And life happens. Things are messy. We know that this isn't something that was being done maliciously, but it still happens.
But what happens? They break the door when they're moving
Absolutely.
out, and now you go to it. So one thing that you had said, I remember, was that, usually you forfeit your right to a walkthrough. So I'm a nut. So I always want to make sure that the buyer and the seller are both protected, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I actually do a walkthrough before the buy, whether on the
and
listing
after.
yes, whether on the listing agent or the buyer's agent.
Right.
For instance, we're in a market where sellers kind of are puffing their chest out.
Right.
Per se.
Right.
I had a client, and for him, the simultaneous close was going to be very difficult.
Totally stressful. If you can avoid it, you should.
Yeah, but we had a buyer that was willing to close in 25 days. So he was going to avoid a lot of fees in regards to getting that money with, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He was paying cash for the new one and what have you. So we decided to do that, and we did a use and occupancy, and we did the walkthrough, and I trusted this individual. I knew that this individual was the seller. The seller was
right.
He wasn't going to destroy the property or anything, and nothing happened. But you don't know.
Nope.
Anything can happen.
Yep.
I mean, we had that the great flood of 2010, and
I know.
always remember that.
Yep.
So imagine if you had purchased a property
God
before
forbid.
that, and then you rented it back. Now, who's responsible for that?
And this is the $1 million question, right? Because the insurance defense attorneys are real buggers, and they're going to all point the fingers. But at the end of the day, the owner has to be the one that has the culpability. And I did have the hot water tank was a true story. Oh, wow. I had someone who held over. It wasn't contemplated in the use and occupancy because hadn't come up before.
Course,
so, this was a long time ago. And the seller said, well, I'm willing to, take some responsibility, but should I have to pay for the whole thing? And I said, of course not. Not instance the parties agreed to split it, but really they were
amicable.
Yeah, they were amicable, but really it was the buyer's house, right?
Well,
it'd be no different than if you're a landlord.
Have to do anything.
No, 100%. Wow. So, I always recommend, and my standard agreements do multiply the, walk through at the beginning, as a baseline, and then at the end to ensure that the security deposit can be released and that only any changes to the condition between those days or weeks or months are being done. But remember, if there's going to be a holdover for use and occupancy, you may have some financing consideration because for a single family owner occupied property, the lender requires the buyer to take possession within 60 days. So you do have a cap on really how long you can let that seller stay there.
And when I'm working with buyers, I really, really, really try to avoid
altogether
any type of rent back, and this piques another question. So let's say people want to close on a Friday, but they want to work and they want to close at 3:30 or 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon.
Yes.
As a listing agent, I will tell the buyer, I will not give you those keys until Monday. And I don't know whether I'm right or wrong or indifferent on that. What are your thoughts and takes on that?
So it's such a great question. I mean, Rhode Island is a notice state. So for years, everybody you have to be on record before the transaction's official. And again, COVID sort of changed that a little bit for us because we started developing gap insurance, which again has been used in many other jurisdictions, but wasn't really adopted here until it became necessity.
Really? Oh, so the gap insurance didn't come into
Not
play
in Rhode Island.
How interesting, Melissa. I never even knew that.
Yeah, well, because it was sort of the mother of invention is necessity. Yeah. So we knew that in some instances there was a particular town that was closed for over an entire week couldn't record anything because the entire town had COVID.
Let me guess,
so
less than 295.
it was, yes. So you're just like kind of stuck. So thankfully the gap came into play to say, and there were very staggering title insurance claims as a result of gap. Wow. In fact, we maintained a policy at that point that we wouldn't close unless an owner's policy was taken because we knew there was so much risk of exposure because of these recording issues. So if I have a closing very late in the day, in theory, we would just record the next morning. But if it's straddling a weekend and we've been able to update the title and we have all of the money and we have the signed deed, arguably you could fund under gap with the permission of the title insurance underwriter, which we have done, so that the seller has their money. Because in my world, although, I understand the approach of you can't have the keys, it's really kind of a quid pro quo. The seller doesn't want to give you access to the house until they have their funds.
Okay.
So that's sort of one of my caveats is it's not really my decision or maybe the agent's decision. It's the seller's decision. Yeah. And when we are explaining it to them that the buyers are going to have access to the house, but you're not going to have access to your money, I think a little bit of a red flag goes up for them and they're like, yeah, that doesn't feel okay. Yeah. So if we can fund under gap, great. But my rule of thumb is let's close before 1 on a Friday. Let's not leave it to chance. I mean, even at that, there's been times where the town hall's, recording system goes down or life happens. There's a major storm. But let's just try to close before 1 o'clock on a Friday.
So I do that all the time. I always make sure. Yeah. And the big thing that you said there was that the lender had funded it because
funding is huge.
I heard a horror story in one of my previous episodes about how they didn't have the payoff. This is obviously not your office.
Thank God.
They did not have the payoff and they closed and the payoff came in on the Monday. The buyers had gone through, ripped the whole entire kitchen out, and the payoff came in more than what the people paid for the house.
Well, so there is always a caveat that even if we are going to do that, I usually do suggest not demoing the property in that interim.
They weren't supposed to.
Oh, brother. That is a total nightmare.
So I guess that's the big thing is as long as the lender funds everything.
Right. But in that case, I would argue you really shouldn't close without a mortgage payoff for precisely that reason.
Of course not. I mean, come on,
that's
Melissa.
a totally different problem.
But this is why you need a professional real estate attorney.
Yes.
Not just an attorney. Because there's a lot of attorneys out there that do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We'll do a little divorce. We'll do a little bankruptcy. We'll do a little real estate. Look. Melissa and her father have been in the real estate game, 50 plus years. So, and let me tell you, I just had an instance the other day. So we have an issue with an encroachment on an abandoned road. I don't know if you heard about this that I'm going on with your father. And so the people that actually own the paper road, I actually know them because it's Rhode Island.
Of course.
So your father called and they were like, hey, we haven't talked to you forever. They knew your father.
Of course.
So of course they're friendly.
Yeah.
And of course I know them. So I go to them and they're actually going to work out this issue.
It's amazing.
And it's one of those things where as soon as it came up, I said, this is going to be an almost impossible solution. And then I was like, but I know them.
Yeah.
And it
and
such a Rhode Island story.
But beyond that, I think being solution oriented is really the most important thing. And you had touched on it earlier. I think that's really where our office differs with a lot. And a lot of non-real estate attorneys aren't solution oriented, right? If you've got a litigator, they're used to fighting. They're used to being at a place of impasse and we'll just wait this out. We'll just, mark the calendar for a month from now to deal with it. We're not going to do that.
Well, this, people don't understand that buying and selling, this right here is 100%. You're dealing with people's lives. You're dealing with people's every day, their emotions, their home, where they're going to sleep at night.
100%.
It's a whole different story than litigating over money.
Right.
And so that's why it is just so important. I mean, I just think about these stories. I'll never forget there was this house in Coventry and your father was helping me out on it. And it was a title issue because there was a sliver of land. And he got it done.
Yeah.
I don't know how he got it done. He got it done, Melissa.
Yeah.
And I was blown away because I thought that was a done deal. I was like, you know what? I just chalked it up because, I've learned that anything in our pipeline, until it's in your bank account,
Yeah, doesn't count.
You never spend that money as a real estate agent.
But I feel like at the end of the day, all problems can be resolved. It's just a function of how long it takes and how much it costs. Yep. And again, if you don't have title insurance, then you might be bankrolling that. And that may be a problem that you don't want to deal with right now, or you have to wait until a certain number of years total for the problem to just expire, because everything eventually does get resolved.
100%. I've had some things, I mean, you were the attorney when I had a buyer pass away 3 days before closing.
I remember that one. I tell this story all the time, Mel. Just told it last week.
Did you really?
Yep.
It's funny because every single listing appointment and buyer consultation that I have, I scare the crap out of the clients because I'm like, it's never a done deal. I had a buyer die 3 days before closing, and I use that
I've
story.
had sellers die during closing transactions. Like, death is a big showstopper. Yeah. And that is a problem because nobody's expecting it.
Of course they're not.
No.
Of course they're not.
Yeah.
And it's like emotional, it's sad, and sometimes deposits can't, you can't get a deposit back.
Right.
Sometimes you can. It just all depends who's in the party and who's working on everything.
Right.
So for sellers, what would you say your number one thing is to be like, you definitely need to have seller representation because of this?
I would say because it's complicated. It's messy. I think having somebody that's going to counsel you about your rights and responsibilities when things get hard. No, maybe it's just going to be a sign here, wham, bam, no issues come up, but that's not the majority of it anymore.
I agree with that statement.
When I started 20 years ago, it was so much easier.
So much easier.
I don't know. Were we just ignorant?
No, you want to know what it was?
Less litigious.
There was a lot of paper pushing and a lot of things that weren't done appropriately, in my opinion, during the boom of 04
maybe
to 08, in my opinion. And I might be totally wrong, but I think that there was just a lot of people that were just pushing papers, making money, wet signatures. We didn't have dot loop. We didn't have all of that. So I just, that's my take on it. But again, I've only been doing it for 20 years, I mean, maybe we should ask your dad.
I know. It would be interesting to get his perspective of like, all of the history and where we're going, where we've been.
100%, because even like you touched earlier, that different states have different rules and laws. So this is really important to know that if you have an out-of-state seller with a license that is not licensed in the state of Rhode Island, there is a 6% withholding tax.
Absolutely.
For the seller's proceeds. A lot of people are unaware, even agents in the industry are unaware. And there's a form that has to be filed with the Division of Taxation, correct?
Yep.
How important is it to know that at the beginning of the transaction, Melissa?
So every seller, I talk to every single seller, and if they have an out-of-state number, I'm already on heightened alert. Like, oh my gosh, they're probably not from here. And that means they may not be here. But I ask every single seller, are you a Rhode Island resident? Does your driver's license support that? And then it always lends itself to, well, why are you asking? And Mel, did you know that if you are a foreign person, there's also a federal withholding tax?
I was unaware of that.
So I had a client
completely unaware.
Just sold. He lives in Switzerland. He is not a U.S. citizen. Bought this property, and he has other properties. So we had to file what's known as a FRIPTA. And
FRIPTA?
Yeah, the tax.
Oh my goodness, I've learned 3 things from you
The
today,
tax
Melissa.
is at least 15% on top of the 6%.
Top of the 6%.
Yes.
So that's 21%?
There are some mitigating factors and ways to avoid it or reduce it. But in the federal, it's based on the gross sales price, not the net either. So if you're selling a property for $500,000, but you're only going to get $100,000, it's 15 of the original sales price. So
how interesting. And how many attorneys probably don't even know that?
I mean, I'd like to hope most attorneys know it, but it doesn't come up that often.
Why would it?
In my practice, I've probably handled it 24 times in 20 years. So it's not an everyday occurrence because most of our clients are U.S. citizens.
Yeah, or live in the state,
But, as a listing agent, you may be dealing with someone who's constantly international, or you just get the sense like they may not be U.S. persons, even if they're living here. It does not matter. No, if they have a green card, you're fine. But if they don't have a green card, we really have to be worried about that because I've had it happen at the closing.
Oh my
And that's a
goodness.
really bad day. Nobody wants to be in that closing.
Nobody wants to be
Nope.
in that closing. Well, that's really interesting because I know how long the state of Rhode Island takes to file that silly form. I can't even imagine trying to get a
Yeah.
form done federally.
So you can actually just remit the money
Okay.
federally post-closing
Okay.
because it's so much. You don't actually have to get the form stamped in advance. You can, but that
Wow.
takes quite a bit of time.
Wow, that is absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
I can't believe that. Well, it's interesting because you just reminded me. I have a seller. I just listed the property yesterday, and he's out of state. So I get before you leave
Send it over
today,
to
remind me
Yep.
so you can reach out.
I
to
am
him.
having a rash of non-resident sellers. Tons.
Interesting. You know what I think has happened, and this is totally off the real estate cusp, but I think a lot of job openings are being created outside of the state, and people that maybe went to school here and stayed here and may not be getting the most money for their job. Like my particular client moved to Colorado, so I'm assuming he got a way better value.
Right.
The cost of living is so much more expensive.
For
out there,
sure.
blah, blah,
Right.
blah.
I mean, think about it. With all the inflationary costs, everything is higher and our earnings haven't gone up. So I think a lot of folks are in a place. I know an attorney who just uprooted his 4 children and moved to a state where he's not barred because the cost of living is so much lower, saying we'll figure it out because we know that our dollars are going to go a lot farther there. And I think that that's something that we're starting to see more and more with the cost of living going up and, the wages staying static.
I mean, the state of Rhode Island is such a beautiful
It
place.
is.
I mean, I'm born and bred Rhode Island. You're never getting rid of me.
Right, right. And I'll be honest, when we had COVID, I can't tell you the number of people, they were flooding from out of state.
right.
We had all this out of state money, cash
Yes,
coming in,
cash,
purchasing
cash,
real
cash.
estate. And one of my agents said, Rhode Island is the best kept secret, has been blown. Our cover has been blown because you can ride the train to New York. You can get to Boston really easy. We're so close.
You know what we need? Come on, ride the train. That just came into my head when you said that. But I really feel as though it is so important for sellers to have representation.
Yes.
So as a real estate agent, I think it's really, really imperative when you're going on those pre-listing appointments, going on those listing appointments saying, hey, I always do a seller net proceed sheet.
Oh, music to my ears. You need to.
I've been doing it since I got into the industry.
Excellent.
I make them show me their mortgage statement.
Well, how are you going to know otherwise?
Because I want them to know the money that they're going to get.
Right.
And most of the time, because people always want more money than less money,
Sure.
I usually pad it, right?
Yeah.
'Cause I'll make sure the sewer assessments,
Right.
ding, 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 ding,
Right.
ding. Always make sure, even if it says it doesn't have one, but you know that the sewers just went in within the past 30 years,
Yep.
call the town. It takes 5 minutes.
Right.
Call the town.
Yep.
Between sewer assessments, water, sewer. In the state of Rhode Island, we pay taxes in arrears.
Most communities,
How
yep.
many sellers know that we pay
They
taxes
don't.
in arrears? And when you go sell your house,
Yep.
if you have $5,000 worth of taxes, you're going to have to credit $2,500.
Yeah.
$2,500 is a lot of money.
Absolutely.
Less to get at a closing table.
Yeah, 100%.
I'll never forget, I had a seller. He was livid now. He was on point. He was detail oriented, had lived in the house for 30 years, on point with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Super nice guy, never had a problem with it. He called me up and was like, what is this? I pay my taxes up to date. Da-da. I said, no, Mr. So-and-so, we pay taxes in arrears. This isn't right. And he started yelling at me. And it was from a person that I never expected, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, I am not the attorney. Maybe the attorney can explain it better to you, but the attorney is the one. This is when we used to have HUDs.
Yeah.
This is how far it was going
Yeah.
back. I was like, you're going to have to call the attorney because I just couldn't. He wasn't following with
Yeah.
what I was saying. And so his wife made him call me back and apologize to me. I
Aw.
felt so bad because I know he was just like, I pay my bills.
I'll be honest
And
with
people
you.
don't understand it.
They don't. And there are still times where sellers come in unrepresented. I'm reviewing the final numbers with them because I've got to get documents signed and they will get argumentative. And you know what I say? I recommend that you call the town hall because I'm not going to convince them that the
No.
way they think taxes run is wrong because they're of the mindset that they're on time. And I usually always say, you're right, you are on time. The town is behind.
The town is
by
always 6
design.
months behind.
So-
Yes. And then there's other fees, that people don't realize. You got water bills, you got sewer bills, you have sometimes these loan modifications.
Oh, for sure. And that again is kind of a big thing that happened during COVID where people were seeking out forbearance and they have these HUD claims, but they don't make payments on it.
Oh, I haven't run into a COVID one
Oh,
yet.
yeah.
Oh, my
A
goodness.
lot of them are COVID related because they fell behind on their mortgage. The bank was like, hey, would you like a forbearance? Yep, no problem. Not realizing homeowners
That goes
didn't.
on the back end. They don't let you not pay.
They didn't read the
Come
red
on.
tape. They didn't know it's
Come
on the back
on.
end. Mel, I'm telling you. People are like, what?
I owe 80 grand. How?
I'm telling
You
you.
didn't pay your mortgage for 4 years.
Right. Right.
What did you think? It just miraculously went away?
It seems inherently obvious, I think, because we do this all the time,
True,
but clients
yeah.
don't understand. And so often they're signing documents without legal representation in those
Oh, I
instances.
didn't even think about that.
Yeah, if they go sign a forbearance agreement, they'll just go to the bank and get it notarized. The notary's not asking them, do you understand your legal rights under this agreement?
And with loan modifications.
So
I
we're
had no
seeing a lot
idea
of
they
that
did that during COVID too.
because there were so many. Remember, there was a moratorium on foreclosures.
Yes.
So if people were in a place where they couldn't afford to make payments, you know, in order for the bank to clear their books, they filed HUD claims and HUD took care of it.
Wow.
So the banks got the money, but you had HUD sitting in the back end putting that lien on the property.
How interesting.
Well, it doesn't feel interesting. It feels
No,
awful.
No, it does feel awful, but I mean, you know, even when I was I think you were doing the closing. Do you remember that one where we were all sitting there and the seller's sister was with her and there was another real estate attorney?
I think maybe
the agent.
did they leave?
The woman was really upset, went out of the room. I think you got up and went out of the room.
Yeah.
I was there with my clients. I was like, there's no way this lady's gonna sign.
Yeah.
And then her sister was actually an attorney of some other sort, and the sister just looked at my clients and said, she's gonna sign.
Yeah.
She owes me that money.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let her sign. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, imagine going to a closing table thinking you're getting 85 grand and you walk out with 5 grand.
I know.
Can
Or
you
they
ima-
owe money.
Can you imagine?
Which again, if you don't have an attorney,
and if you don't have the money, how are you supposed to get it? Wow.
I hate to tell you who usually pays it.
Who?
The agents. Usually the agents are like, well, we're going to have to just make this work. I've had lots of agents
didn't
have to
even
take
think
concessions
about
on their
that.
commissions
But
over
see-
the years.
But see, that's why I feel very lucky and blessed to have met you and your firm from the get-go. When I started in real estate,
Yeah.
I was so lucky to be able to have you and know that when I go to you, you have a solution. And if you don't know the solution off the top of your head, you're like X, Y, and Z. Like, I'll never forget. I remember that time where somebody, the buyers had signed a offer to purchase contract. It was in Massachusetts, remember? And I called you freaking out because
Yep.
I'm like, this guy's going to hold me to it. He's going to record it, da-da-da.
Right.
But he didn't have a leg to stand on.
No.
And he was all full of it.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing too, is I was able to be able to call you and you basically talked me through it and was like, he's got nothing to stand on.
Right.
Da-da-da. And guess what? We got another contract, we got another buyer, and we closed
Right.
in 40 days.
Right.
And I think the whole solution to the problem is the big thing.
Yeah.
So again, Melissa Delana with Delana Law represents buyers and sellers and does wills and LLCs and
Do a lot of things that are peripheral to real estate because again,
100%.
that's what you need.
Exactly. So the other thing I wanted to ask you was, I mean, I know that you're a very successful real estate attorney and we really appreciate all your sponsorships within the Realtor organization. You do so many classes and really educate us realtors. And I think as a community, we are very grateful for that.
Thanks. I'm passionate about education. I think it's so important. And if the
agree.
clients are better educated, if the realtors are better educated, it's just a better transaction.
Smoother.
Yes.
My goal is to have it be a smooth transaction. I tell everyone there's going to be hurdles. We're going to have to jump over something somewhere along the line.
Right.
It always happens. But as long as you're prepared for it and you know that there's a solution, and
Right.
guess what? We're not neurosurgeons. So if
Right.
if something comes up, nobody's dying.
Absolutely.
The closing may get extended for a week. It's not going to
Right.
dramatically change anyone's life. I know
Right.
theoretically it
Right.
can.
It
but
feels
not
uncomfortable,
Yes.
but there are workarounds.
100%. But you are a successful real estate attorney, and I know you're a successful investor as well, too. So being a super successful woman, do you have any pointers that you can give other women in the field or women that maybe want to dip their toe into investing?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the biggest thing is just to be really careful.
Conservative,
I
like
am
myself.
super conservative, like money in my mattress, if I could, conservative. I'm risk averse. So it has to be a sure thing. And I think that when you see it, you never know it's a sure thing. You're always gonna have those like little butterflies, like, ooh, what if this doesn't work out? Or ooh, what if there's a problem? But at the end of the day, it's more of a sure thing than, a lot of the risky propositions that are out there. So I think that's really the best advice I can offer is trust your gut and make sure that you don't walking into something that's super risky. Make sure that you are surrounded by people who are professionals and can give you valued opinions about that level of risk assessment. I mean, and if you're someone who's super willing to take a lot of risks, then jump in 2 feet, look later, and maybe you'll be rewarded.
But also realize that there is the possibility of the loss.
Right. But for me, that's not the way I like to frame it. I like to walk a very narrow line of being risk averse and making sure that whatever I'm getting into, I've got that gut feeling like, okay, this is going to work out.
And I'm the same way. I'm extremely conservative. I was just talking to someone else how I like single family rentals.
Yeah. That's a good.
I also
like rentals or investments in properties, or I should say in communities that have generally more sustained values, because there are certain communities where there's ups and downs. Education is a big factor. So the towns that have kind of the tried and true, everybody wants to live there because it's good education, that's going to be important.
100%. So I do a few podcasts of real estate horror stories.
Yes.
So I want your 2 top horror stories, and then I will let you go on your way because I know you have to get to a closing.
I do have to get to a closing. I don't know 2 horror stories. Well, one horror story actually has to do with title insurance, where my client was under contract to purchase a condo. Older woman had just recently lost her husband, so she was selling her home. And this is a very common story. So I'm representing her in her sale and in her simultaneous purchase. We find out on her sale that the property that she bought almost 30 years ago, there was a bad foreclosure in the back title. And this is a huge issue that now there needs to be clearing of the title.
Right? Yeah.
So the only way to clear the title would be with a title insurance policy. But she doesn't think she has one. She doesn't know. She doesn't have any documents. Her husband took care of all of this, which is so sad. And
I just want to give her a hug.
I know. And the attorney that represented them has since been disbarred. So I'm going nowhere in a hurry here. I've called all the title insurance companies. I'm trying to find a policy. I've directed her to look at all of her documents, just like I am begging, right? I'm praying to the title gods that we find it. We never find it. So we had to identify that, okay, now the next step is to clear title. She's going to have a quiet title action in Superior Court. That requires a litigator. I am not your girl for that. That is not my gig. So we refer her to a litigator. Now we've got to figure out, well, what are we going to do with the closing? Because she's supposed to sell this property that she doesn't own clear title to and buy. How are we going to do this? Are we going to have to delay it months? Because that's how long a quiet title action is going to take. Fortunately, the buyer was cash. My client was purchasing cash, and we had enough margin that she could put a very substantial amount of money down as an escrow for the clearing to happen post-closing. And the other attorney, I don't know that I would have done this, but the other attorney was like,
sure,
yeah, I'm okay with it. So we ended up holding $50,000. And it didn't cost nearly that much. She ended up paying the money to the other attorney for the retainer for the quiet title action. The quiet title action went through fairly smoothly. So she was only probably on the hook for about $25,000 to clear that title. And she was able to still keep the closings on track. But again, imagine she had to pay $25,000 to clear title. If she had had a title policy,
it would have been 2.
It would have cost her nothing.
Nothing.
Because the title insurance was there. Our original premium wouldn't have probably been $2,000.
It probably would have been $1,000 if that.
Wow. So I think for me, that's one that like really drives it home to understand how
getting that title policy.
Totally. And all the ripple effect components that you can see happen. And we got really, really lucky that she was able to simultaneously purchase and sell because she had enough margins there for a substantial escrow. But that's not.
Her husband was with her helping her out on that one.
100%. That's not something most people would have been able to figure out.
No, and even attorneys. I don't think most attorneys would have been able to figure
Right.
that out. And because you have such great referral partners
Yeah.
with your litigation attorney, you were able to get it
Right.
done.
Right.
And I know these litigation attorneys, they don't call people back. So you have to go in through a referral
Yeah.
in order to get that call back.
Yep. Yep. That
Wow.
attorney was excellent. I would recommend this woman over and over for title clearance.
That is-
So
Mental note
Yep.
noted. Wow,
Yep.
that's crazy.
the other one, I mean, it's funny because you touched on the one that we had together years and years ago, and I tell this story all the time.
I
That
love
is
that. I'm
that
part
is
of your
probably one of my
stories.
all-time single most important title nightmares, or just closing nightmares to talk about, which, the buyer did nothing wrong. They were clear to close. We were a week before the
She
closing.
was so sweet.
Everything
too.
was lock loaded, ready to go. And then the husband died. And talk about just like a gut punch, right? And the seller has to find out on the week of the closing, that Monday. And I do empathize with her position. Well, what's going to happen with his passing? And, you've got to be empathetic and, kind of walk delicately on eggshells with this. But the woman said, well, I'd like to still purchase it. So we're like, okay, great. We'll give you some time. Bury your husband. We'll figure it out. Well, unfortunately, her husband didn't leave her in the financial position she thought. At least this is my recollection of the fact pattern that I teach. And now the woman's in a position where she can no longer purchase the property, but she was past all of her contingencies. So legally speaking, the seller was dead to rights, entitled to keep that deposit. And as I recall, she ended up keeping the deposit. A portion of the deposit was returned to the buyer as a result
So
of.
what happened was, how our listing agreements.
Yes.
I always put that I get 50% of the deposit.
Right.
And I'm so glad I do. And I'm
Right.
so glad I did. And
Right.
I got 50% of the deposit. And I had my office make that check out to
the
the
buyer.
survivor.
Yeah.
And
Which was just such a generous thing. And honestly,
I'm not keeping it to one person.
the right thing, right? For
Yeah.
sure. But the seller was in a position where after they got half the deposit effectively, when they went to subsequently sell the property, they didn't get as much money for it, as I recall the facts to be. Was it the same?
Yeah.
I thought there was a
literally
little
got
loss of
exactly
market.
the same amount of money, and it was like a 35-day period.
It
So
wasn't long. We
wasn't
did get
long
it back
at all.
under agreement,
She
but
was a little difficult.
it was, but again, if you remember, as I recall, she was relocating across the country.
She was already in Florida.
So it
And
was
and it was a vacant unit
yeah,
and
this is
everything.
stressful. It's maybe someone that is struggling with the idea of, there's a lot of anxiety in this world. And especially when you're so
Especially
far
now when
away.
kids started.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, that is for certain one that ranks up there with top closing nightmares.
I cannot believe that you tell that. And
You know why?
Because it's a great story to know that it's never a done deal.
Yeah.
Until the money's in your bank account.
And it
Until
also
the
is a
money's
good
there.
illustration of contract law. At the end of the day, contingencies protect you until they've elapsed.
Yeah.
There was nothing that the buyers did wrong. It was just bad circumstances.
100%. And I've seen that happen in a couple of different areas.
Yeah.
So is there in closing, any golden nuggets
Oh,
that you
boy.
can give to a buyer and a seller when moving forward with the purchasing and selling process?
As a simultaneous transaction?
That sounds great.
Yeah. So on a simultaneous transaction or even just a sale, there's one tip that I always offer, which is pack an overnight bag, because you are not going to know where your shoes are. I can't tell you the number of clients that come in.
What a great thing.
And they're like, I don't know why my shoes don't match my outfit. And I'm like, I can't see your feet. I don't really care, but thank you for telling me. Because if you've packed an overnight bag first, you're always going to have your immediate needs, your toiletries, your contact lenses. You're not going to be in a place where you're like, where is that box labeled important, right? Because the simultaneous is really challenging.
It's really stressful.
Yep. And have a contingency plan, because you should always have a contingency plan.
Just in
If this
case.
doesn't work out, what are we going to do? How is this going to look? Can we have our moving company take our belongings and hold them overnight or over the weekend? Because you don't know if a blizzard's going to blow in. And if you've got a contingency plan, maybe you won't need it, right? Like in
But
life.
it's good to have.
Yep.
And, one thing I want to add to that too is, as a listing agent and a buyer agent, try to get the sellers to do the big move the night before.
Yes.
And so what I do is I have a handful of moving companies where they'll hold it overnight.
Right.
The sellers go stay with the parents, and then they go
Yeah.
to the
Or get a
walkthrough and the
hotel.
closing in the morning. It's so much easier.
Yeah.
Every single time I do it the same day, the moving takes longer than expected.
Does moving ever not take longer than expected?
I mean, I've been in my house now for over a year and a half, and I still have boxes.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
always.
We're consumers, so we have too much stuff.
Yes.
But,
yeah.
You know,
it always takes longer than you think. It's always going to have some bumps or lumps.
100%.
So get that stuff done the day before, because you don't want to be in a place where now the closings can't happen because you can't leave.
And now you get 2 closings.
Yeah.
Possibly a third or a fourth closing to have
Hinging
to
on
deal
it.
with.
Absolutely.
Well, Melissa, I just can't thank you enough for coming today and sharing all of your wisdom with us, because it is really so important to have a good referral real estate attorney partner. And I'm so lucky and grateful to continue to have you, but I've had you for 20 years and I'm going to have you for another 20 years.
Well, thank you. It was awesome. So fun to be here and experience the coffee grinder and be able to do our coffee talk. And if there's anything I can do to support you or anybody that's listening, by all means, just give us a call.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, we're coming from the Coffee Grinder in Warwick, Rhode Island. Thanks for listening to this episode of Coffee Talk with Mel.